So I decided I needed to kind of pave my own path and figure out a way to make income. And how could I do that? And I've always done something artistic or creative.
So if you want to make a full-time living as a professional watercolorist, this is the interview for you. As I interview Carrie Waller, ambassador of Daniel Smith Watercolor Paints, she's going to tell you how she maneuvered through life and got where she is today. Let's watch that interview now. Without any further ado, we're going to just hop into this. Carrie, could you just tell me a little bit about you and your just kind of like a little bit of how you got started in art and type of art that you make?
I am Carrie Waller. I paint realistic still life for the most part, realism for sure, and watercolor. And I'm kind of known for painting glass, and that's typically what people want to learn when I'm teaching. But I started painting probably when I got married. We moved to Germany right after we got married, and I had just graduated from college in interior design. And then we moved to a foreign country and I couldn't work in interior design. So I decided I needed to kind of pave my own path and figure out a way to make income. And how could I do that? And I've always done something artistic or creative. So I decided to pick up every book I could find in the library on watercolor. And I thought, I'm going to teach myself watercolor, and then I'm going to teach classes because the Skills Development Center near us needed teachers. And I'm like, well, I can paint and draw. And they really wanted something besides oil. They wanted watercolor. And I've always loved, I didn't paint with watercolor a lot in high school or college, but I've always loved that media. And so I picked up, like I said, every book I could find at the library. My favorite one was the Reader's Digest, which sounds ridiculous, but it was really comprehensive. And it had like every single technique, you know? And so I sat down and I painted a handful of paintings for kind of a mini portfolio to get back in. And he's like, you're hired to paint, teach painting classes. And it kind of grew from there. And I started teaching classes there, and then I taught classes on my own. And then when we left Germany, I kind of departed from painting, and I told myself I would do something creative because my husband's career field, we move every few years. And so I knew I'd have to reestablish myself everywhere we went. So I just promised myself I would do something creative since I wasn't in my interior design field. So I've done all kinds of crazy things. I painted murals for the Army. I have painted murals with my own company and faux finishing. And then when I started having children, that shifted again because I was staying at home with the kids. And I also wanted, my husband is in the military. And so he deployed, and I was kind of losing my sanity with, a toddler and a baby and my husband in a dangerous location. And I thought, what could bring me some peace? I need something to do that isn't like an outlet for me. And I was like, oh, I used to paint. And then about that time, I had seen the movie Julie and Julia. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And it's about Julie Powell is the author of the book, and she she cooks her way through Julia Child's cookbook, and she does a blog about the entire process. And that's back when blogging was really kicking off and starting. And I thought, well, what could I do a blog about? And that's, that all kind of came together. And I was like, well, I'll paint a painting a week and I'll blog about my experience with kids at home and painting and all that stuff. So that's how I kind of got back into it. And I didn't know anything about the watercolor world. I didn't know there were societies. I didn't know there were societies with different states. I didn't know anything really. So I took my first watercolor workshop based on location where my in-laws could babysit for my kids. And I found one in the back of Artist Magazine, a workshop that was, looked interesting. And so I took my first one, and then I was introduced to Louisiana Watercolor Society via that workshop because a lot of the attendants were from that society. And it kind of opened my eyes. I had no idea that people were like making a profession. It's not that I didn't think it could happen, but I just had, it wasn't something that was in my day-to-day life. So it made me realize people were out there with this as a profession, teaching and selling work, and also, people taking workshops and doing it as a hobby. So it just opened my eyes to all of it. And so I started entering competitions, first with Louisiana Watercolor Society. And then my first competition I entered with them, I got a blue ribbon, and it kind of was validating. It was like, oh, maybe there's something to this. And gave me that push to kind of really establish myself and figure it out. And I really kind of put in my mind at that time, I'm like, I want to do this professionally, and I want this to be my thing.
That's so good. Like you make it seem like a real situation, and I appreciate you being so transparent. So and I want people to know that you're a Daniel Smith brand ambassador. And how did that come about? How did you get with Daniel Smith?
So years ago, so they've changed their business model. A lot of you probably have known they used to have kind of brick and mortar stores, and they were their own, smaller company, I think. And then at some point, I don't remember what year, it was after 2014, they changed it up and they started selling to like the major companies. So now you see them through Dick Blick and Cheap Joe's and Jerry's Artarama, and they don't have like a catalog anymore, or brick and mortar store. And prior to that, they used to do a catalog competition every year, and it was for the cover of the catalog. And so I don't even remember how it came on my radar, but I was like, okay, I'll enter the catalog competition. I was not the best at like reading prospectuses and figuring out all the little details, right? So I'm just like, oh, here's a cool contest, I'll enter that. So I entered it, and it was 2014, I think, or 13. And I get a phone call, and they're like, are you sitting down? You need to sit down. And I'm like, what? And they're like, you just won the cover competition for Daniel Smith. And they're like, do you know what the prize is this year? Well, I had no clue, but it was a $10,000 value that year. And so, because it was it was an anniversary year for them. And so I got a trip to Seattle to visit them, and I got art supplies with the rest of it. I mean, what artist wouldn't be like a kid in a candy shop, right? Like all those arts, all those supplies. So I probably drove them crazy, because I think it took me 2 years to figure out everything, because I just would call and be like, can I get I had kind of a running tab. But that's how I was introduced to Daniel Smith. And then right after that was perfect timing. We moved to Japan, to Tokyo, Japan. And so I was able to take all my supplies with me, because that is also another, like, we're moving to another country. Of course, they're going to have art supplies, but are they going to be what I'm used to? Can I have access to what I'm used to? So it was perfect timing, because I was able to pack up all of my winnings and take everything with me to Japan. And so also through that, that's when John Cogley and Catherine Taylor, John's the owner, Catherine's the VP. They decided they were going to start traveling a lot more and going around and getting their brand out internationally. So Catherine had contacted me about, like, trying to figure some things out in Japan. And so I kind of went around to some stores in, Japan, trying to see if I could be any help. But so that's kind of how that all came about. And then it's just kind of grown from there. And then, of course, COVID, they started doing all those interviews weekly, and really ramped up the ambassador program. So just kind of all fell in place like that.
That's so good. I so wish they would have told me to sit down when they made me a brand ambassador, because like I was so excited, like the floodgates like came. And but oh my gosh, and if you're watching this now, like don't go now, because we're gonna keep talking, but you can watch one of Carrie's demos over at the Daniel Smith YouTube channel. She did an amazing demo for them. Questions that came to mind for you, Carrie, is what do you find most rewarding about watercolor painting?
I just think you can't replicate what we do in any other medium. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I know when you hear about watercolor artists that start doing oil paints, and they're just like, the paint just stops, it doesn't move, it doesn't do anything. So all the things that people complain about or have a hard time figuring out, because for me, I'm like a real goal-oriented, competitive person. And so for me to know that it's kind of the most difficult medium, that has that reputation, that was just even more of a challenge for me. I'm like, I will make this look the way I want it to look, make it look realistic and do things with watercolor that you don't typically, see. And so that was part of my challenge. And I just love that those colors get on the paper and they mingle together and they do these unexpected things. And I don't know where else you could get that, with what other medium.
How has watercolor painting evolved for you over the years?
I think first off, just figuring out your style. They say you have to put, I don't know how, so many brush strokes, so many miles of paint, paper down, canvas, whatever, before you can figure out your style. I think that's true. Out of practice, you kind of evolve to your style. Even figuring out what I wanted to paint, did I think immediately I was going to be a still life painter? I don't even know, that was in the front of my mind, but I really started to realize that's what I was drawn to. And I also, when I first started painting, just to drive me nuts, because people would say, "Oh, as you go along, you'll become a looser painter. You'll get away from this." And I'm like, I don't want to. This is what I like. There's plenty of people out there that do all. There's room for all of us. And so I like where I am, and that's one thing I like to tell my students, because there shouldn't be this pressure that, oh, what you're doing is wrong and you need to change it to something else. Well, if you really like it, stick with it and figure it out. So whatever it is. And I think if you can look through art books, you can go to museums, you can start to figure out what are you drawn to. And so I knew kind of right away, when I'm taking photos, even travel photos, I'm moving the people out. I'm waiting for people to move out of my shot. So figurative was never going to be my thing. And I am a little bit of a control freak. So I think being able to set up my own still life, light it the way I want it, do all those things are really in my wheelhouse and what appeals to me. So I think I've evolved in figuring it out, figuring out what I wanted to do. I first started, I had a lot of dark black backgrounds with my still life, kind of like Dutch, master style. And then I, with my design background, my interior design background, to hone my style, I decided to invent, which is nothing new, but in marketing, they always say, who's your client? And so I decided to figure out who I wanted my client to be. Where did I want my work to be? And so for me, as a visual person and a design background, I figured out an interior space, a house that I wanted all of my work could fit into that house. Does it always? I don't know, but that's a question I always bring to myself. Okay, would this go, in this house with this style that you're going after? I want a kind of contemporary still life realism. And so that's what I ask myself before I start, because I think in still life, you can get very traditional. You can get, all these different ways. And so I really try to go before I get too crazy with ideas. I'm like, okay, does it fit my narrative right now? And that might change, but that's part of the evolution, right now. And that's where I am. So I have this contemporary idea and it's done really well for me. So I'm going to stick with it. So,
what are materials do you use?
When I first started painting, I was living in Germany, and the local art store there had Schminke paints, and they're all pan form. And I had the limited a bit of watercolor I had done in high school and college. I didn't do any. I was interior design. I did do studio classes. I just didn't do watercolor. But in high school, it was even pan form, the paints that I had used. And so I got used to using pan form, dry paints, that kind of thing, because they didn't even sell the tubes at the art store where I was in Europe. So I got introduced to Schminke. So lucky me, I got introduced to a really great brand, right off the bat. And then I kind of went from there. And then, like I said, when I took that first watercolor class workshop, that instructor happened to have all the Daniel Smith paints at that class. And so I was introduced to Daniel Smith paints, and they're just so saturated and beautiful and so many amazing colors. And so I've pretty much stuck with Daniel Smith. I have a few colors, from other brands that I pop in that I just can't quite, get what I want out of, I could mix it myself, but I get a little lazy. I'm like, okay, it's in a tube in this brand. So Daniel Smith paints are my primary paint. I have a few Holbein colors, a couple of Schminke colors, but for the most part, it's 99% 99% Daniel Smith. I make my own pans. So I do that. And then now he's got like the sticks, which are so nice, you know, for like traveling, which is essentially, you know, it's a little cheaper, and you can stick for traveling and whatever. You can make them your own, you know, with watercolor sticks. But so I use the Daniel Smith paints for brushes and masking. I'm bad right now because I use Japanese brand and you can't find them anywhere. So once those run out, I'll have to figure it out. But I do like Holbein masking fluid a lot. I use masking fluid a lot. I know that's like a dirty word to some people, but I use it a lot. And I use a ruling pen a lot. It's like a drafting tool. And so I use that. And I have a Japanese brand that I love for that as well. And then those are kind of my go-tos. I try to keep it, even though I use a lot of colors, I try to keep my supplies kind of streamlined.
That's great. And I'm sure people are going to just be curious, paper, whether it's what weight.
So I've been using Arch 156 pound, which is different. It's cold press. I use cold press. So it's in between the 140 and the 300 pound. It used to be called 260 pound, but I guess that was not marketed correctly. So they changed it to 156 pound. That's what I've been using for years. But I say that with a caveat that I know some of the paper with Arches has been problematic lately. So I still have a big stash from my winnings, you know, and when I run out of that, I don't know. I have some Fabriano paper that I'm going to play around with, and Kilimanjaro from Cheap Joe's. I actually like that surface pretty well. So I am kind of like in panic mode, counting my sheets going, oh, when am I going to have to figure this out? You know?
So good. So good. What inspires you when it comes to picking your subject for painting?
I started out, I had a lot of like childhood memories. That's where I went to. So a chair that my grandmother had that had layers and layers of paint that were chipping, ball jars that I used to see when I was a kid, you know, in the I would help my grandma can when I was a kid, and her house was in Southern Illinois. So I kind of drew on childhood memories initially, and then you know, we've moved around a lot, so that changes my perspective every time I move. Japan had a huge influence on me. I lived there for almost 9 years, and that changed my colors. That changed, you know, a lot of my subjects. I don't know if I'll ever be done with that. That was really like my aesthetic and my, you know, like my heart, my soul country. So that really changed my world. So all of those things. So I just feel like if you don't have the opportunity to travel, get out and go to some museums and look at art magazines, look at art books, and just see what you can be inspired from. You know, if I get really stuck, I'll go to Pinterest and start looking through artists and, you know, different still life photographs, and something will trigger, you know. I'm kind of I'm not necessarily like some people really tell a story, you know, have a narrative that they drive everything from. I don't know if I'd have a narrative as much as I might build off a series. So if I did a painting with teapots and tea and lights, then I might have another idea. You know, sometimes it's just something as simple as I want a bokeh background, you know, kind of that out of focus, you know, dreamlike lights in the background. And then the idea of fragile versus iron, like with iron teapots and glass teapots, and, you know, just the dichotomy of that. So, and I'll throw lights in there. Light is always huge. That's my main muse, whether I'm using like fairy lights or party lights or the sun. I set every one of my still lives up outside because nothing replicates the sunshine that I have found, no light. Or if I'm inside, I'm using, you know, like the fairy lights or something. But light drives most of it, color, light. have around or have seen, and I want to elevate it to its most beautiful. And just like with my light bulbs, that was that idea of, we use these every day. They're in our every single light fixture. They're in our houses everywhere, but they're these little pieces of artwork. And I wanted to elevate, the beauty and just show, hey, look at what we've got around us.
This gives people some ideas of things they could paint, whether it's current things in their life now or something from a memory. When I've looked at things of the mason jars and stuff, like I go back into my memory bank of, drinking out of those on a hot summer day, going fishing with my grandpa and stuff like that, and so like, I think, connection is key. And I think one of the things I've really enjoyed about your work is color. But the reason why I've asked you to also come on this show is like, I paint a certain way and you paint a certain way, and it doesn't make us least or better than one or the other, whether someone's more skilled or the time they take. But could you just tell some of the people that are listening right now or watching this on the YouTube that what type of artist, if you were to pin yourself, what type of artist, watercolorist are you?
I go back contemporary realist is what I try. I think right now is kind of where I am, even if it's a traditional subject. I'm trying to like really throw people with the light that's cast around it, the perspective. I painted maraschino cherries, had them backlit and just kind of, like as glowing as possible. So I like to kind of take it in a new direction that's in, kind of a lot, bigger than life sometimes, that kind of thing. So I think contemporary realism is what is in my head. That's what I'm aiming for. Whether I'm there or not, we'll see, but that's what I'm aiming for.
That's a great question, because I know when there are some students taking my intro class, I'm like, okay, now you can go any direction after you're taking this class. And if someone looks at your work and they now know what to like search. So thank you so much for finding yourself in a hole for a second. And so moving on, so this gets thrown around quite a bit. And what do you think makes a successful watercolor artist?
I think at the foundation of any good art, regardless of the medium, is a good drawing. So I think you have to have those technical skills kind of knocked out. I mean, it's kind of like your foundation, and if your foundation is weak, it's all going to crumble. Judging shows, it's kind of evident when you look at, which one has a stronger, foundation when you're looking at all the paintings. So if your drawing is just kind of ho-hum, your painting's going to be kind of ho-hum in my experience. Even if you're doing abstracts, you've got to be thinking about design principles and something to go back, something that you're going from. And so I think that's the first, having those technical skills, putting yourself out there and making yourself draw a lot. I was lucky that I have a technical degree in interior design. And so I did all the drafting classes and, the architecture classes. And so that was the best schooling for me, like super strong in perspective, super strong in drawing and all that kind of stuff. So I would say that the next thing is color, and knowing how to use your color and value. Those kind of go hand in hand. And a lot of times with my students, they're scared to get the value where it needs to be. But that is like the most pivotal thing. Once you get that value in there, then all of a sudden everything else locks into place. So the way I teach, the way I paint is I get my values established immediately, so that it shows you how everything else around your painting, where it has to go to. So, and I think that helps to avoid that adolescent phase of a painting where you're kind of not quite baked yet, and you've got this, your whole painting is just kind of and you get frustrated and you kind of are ready to abandon it. So if you can get your darkest darks in there right away, and then that helps you figure colors around it, then all of a sudden you've got like this map for the whole painting. And so that, I think, I do a lot of my preliminary work in Photoshop or photo editing, whereas some artists do thumbnail sketches, to do the same thing. So however you need to work it out, I think there needs to be a plan. And I think the most successful paintings have a plan, and it's pretty evident when you see there is a plan. So I would say then the color is the next one. It took me a long time. I started painting in sepia when I first started painting, and color was scary to me. You wouldn't think that. Now, if you see my work, it's a lot of color. And sometimes I feel like maybe I need to restrain myself. I've got, too many colors, but I just love it. So I think those three things. So having that foundation and drawing, figuring out your values, and then figuring out your colors on top of it, and what colors go together, what works together. And a lot of that comes with trial and error, or you can take workshops, and that is so helpful because you get to work out, you've got teachers that have already worked out palettes and worked out things, and you garner from that experience. You'll learn stuff from everyone around you. So if you're really just starting out, I think that's huge, especially now where you can have so many online. It's pretty crazy the access everybody has to so many artists now. So find your favorite artist and, take some classes and, find some artists that you really like and just learn from them, because they've already gone through all that. So that could help you jump a few steps, but you still got to paint a lot.
So how has social media impacted the way you work?
Huge. I think where I am and everything is from social media right now. I mean, we lived in Japan for, like I said, almost 9 years. And that enabled me, the silver lining, if there is one, of COVID was that everybody knows how to do a Zoom meeting now. And probably everybody's done some kind of online interaction and brought out artists. Even myself, I've taken some workshops from artists I didn't have access to before. And so, that's huge. And then social media, just having this community, whether it's, Daniel Smith Weekly has these every week of the artist, and then they have a guest artist every week. And so that brings a community of people together, learning about new artists. Eric Rhodes does it with his stream, his art school. And then they've adapted things like Watercolor Live to all of this. So I would say social media is, when Twitter was starting to go down, I'm like, what happens if Facebook and Instagram? What would I do? I mean, I know something else would take over its place, but it's a little scary now. You rely on it so much.
What would you hope that someone or some people would take away from viewing your art?
I hope they take beauty and joy away from it. I think there's enough ugliness in this world, and I just want to make people happy, bring some joy, make them say, I've never looked at a light bulb or a bulb, take where they go back and think, I need to really study these things that, I see all the time. And, and I get a lot of, how did you get those colors in there? And where does it, I want kind of this whimsy, this like kind of magic to be in my work. Like, how did that happen? And, that's unusual. So it's that's what I'm aiming for, is just a little bit of joy and magic.
That's so good. I got 2 more questions for you. And what would you say if someone has watched this all the way to this part and has listened? What would you speak to that person that is thinking about giving up?
You got to dig down and work for it. Nothing good comes out of, I guess you have everything to gain from practicing something all the time, and you can easily give up on anything. But do you want to do this or you don't? So it's a real commitment and a decision. So if you want to do it, you need to get serious with yourself and say, I'm going to commit to this. And that means actual painting time, whether you sit down. I have people I think about, like an artist that I met that she had really terrible circumstances. Her husband passed away. She had to make her own business and had kids. And she still was like, I will paint 2 hours every day, no matter what. And, when I think about that, I think, okay, figure it out. I can find the time, and it means sacrifice, so you may have to sacrifice some sleep or some fun times or, something, but it means a little sacrifice too, if you want to get serious about it. So I guess, you just really have to decide what's important to you and how much you want it, because if you want it, you'll achieve it.
And for the last question, I think people are getting really clear, especially women. I love the fact that you said yes to meeting with me and getting to know you and ask these questions. I think this is going to speak to a lot of wonderful women. But what is that one thing that you do or tool or something that that you don't think anybody else is using often while they're doing their watercolor painting?
Um, I think people are using it like ruling pens every class, every what, they want to find out good ruling pens. So that's one that I have found I can't live without in a painting. I use my ruler a lot. I mean, I go back to my like drafting and graphic design days and I go back and I have my rulers, I have my ruling pens. The only other thing I can think of is I don't use palettes. I got to a point where I was like hoarding palettes because I didn't want to get rid of colors, like you'd mix these colors. I might need that later. I like that color. And then I had these stacks of palettes and I was like, okay, I got to do something about this. And I was just like, we're getting rid of it. Palettes anymore. And I mix on the paper. So I think that's a little unique. And what happened was I started getting cleaner washes and like I let those paints mingle together and mix on the paper and I started getting like these really neat effects. And I guess it's similar to like Seurat where you're putting like a dot next to a dot and then you're getting the colors shifting together and making, so similar to that. But anyway, yeah, so I ditched my palettes and so that's a little different and that might throw some of my students for a loop sometimes. But and I use less water than a lot of my students. So, but that's one of those things when you're learning is how much water, how much pigment, all of that is learning. But I know from enough classes that I come to the table with a little more pigment than a lot of artists do.
That's so good. That's so good. I'm stoked that you took this time to answer these questions. And I would just like you to just let people know where they can find you, where they can see about classes or social media. Could you just give us some of that information?
Sure. My website is Carrie, Carrie Waller, Waller, fine art. .com. So carriewallerfineart.com. My Instagram is at Carrie Waller Art, and I'm on Facebook under Carrie Waller Fine Art or Carrie Rotes Waller, ROETS hyphen Waller, WALLER. I think that's everything. And my email is carriewallerart@gmail.com. And so all my workshops are on my website and my exhibitions and all that stuff. And I do have 2 workshops coming up, one next week with gold leaf and watercolor, and then one beginning of February with kind of dynamic glass and in February. Yeah, it's online classes. So that's also online. And I do have a couple in person coming up. I'm actually the judge for the international show at Louisiana Watercolor Society this year. So everybody enter. So I'll be judging and I'll be doing a workshop for Louisiana Watercolor Society. So that's kind of full circle because I started there, won my first award, and now I'm judging the big show. So that's kind of cool. So that's coming up in May. So very excited, 9th through the 11th. So if you're in the New Orleans area or want to come out there, I'll be doing that. But enter the show. Everybody can enter.
Okay. All right. And Carrie, could you tell us a little bit how you got your name out there? Because that's what people want to know. Like, how do I make myself known as an artist?
Yeah. So I kind of looked into this a little bit and also was a little bit strategic because I moved all the time. I was not in one area where I kind of got stuck in the rut. And I only say that it's great to be in a local society and it's great to do all the local things, but at some point you have to branch out. And because my local area moved every couple of years, my strategy was I want to start entering shows on all of the coasts. So I was picking, like all over the United States to start entering things. And then I kind of went from there. And then I started learning a little bit more, but it got my name out there faster. I got magazine articles, things like that, because I was entering those shows, getting some awards and recognition. And so I think I encourage my students to just really jump out there and start entering some things in places you don't expect. I think people are always like, oh, I can't do that. Well, do it. Because once you start entering Even a rejection. I early on, Jane Freeman told me every rejection she took as a challenge. Okay, my next painting is going to be better than that. So she didn't take it as a, oh, I can't believe I didn't get in and I can't, I'm not, that's it, I'm done, I can't be an artist. She took it as, I will do better than this for the next painting. And so I like to do that to myself as well. It's like, even if you get rejected, okay, my next one will be even better, and it just pushes me a little harder. So enter those shows and start figuring out what's getting in, and yeah, just set a goal for yourself, whatever that goal is, and try to go for it.
That's so good. And I know that's going to speak to others. And you never know, like, you might be in a place right now where you're not getting the recognition you want, but then when you outsource, you actually might stumble into some people that in that area, they love your style of work. And there might be a whole nother group of people that's all they want is like your kind of painting. I'm so
Right.
glad that with us. And just to piggyback on that just a little bit. So how would someone find out about those kind of shows outside of their city?
I'll tell you what I did is I found artists that I was following on social media, and they were winning awards left and right from all these different shows. And I went to their website and I just was like, what shows were they entering? And I went and I made a list, and I went back and I started checking out to see when they had shows, because every society will have their prospectus up or their exhibit list up. And so I started kind of a master list of when shows were, and what kind of time of year. Am I really great at following that? No, I'm always like, right now I'm 4 paintings deep trying to figure out, for shows coming up. But you'll start to see there's a cycle. There are like the big shows like National Watercolor Society, American Watercolor Society, Transparent Watercolor Society. So these are kind of like the big shows, Watercolor USA. So those are kind of like the big ones if I had to categorize. And then you kind of go to like the local shows, and then within the state shows, some are bigger than others. So I try to figure out where some of the more known artists, which states were they entering in, because more than likely they probably had more prizes in those states. Not to say you shouldn't, different ones, but if you're having to pay shipping and which is getting increasingly more and more as we go. So if you're having to do all that, I try to enter ones that have a little more, a little more of a prize bucket to it, or something, a little more to it than just picking out of like drawing out of a hat, which I'm an enter. So I kind of went through and just looked at who I admired and where they were entering, and what, which one, where they were getting awards from. And then the longer you start doing it, you kind of start knowing which judges like your work and which judges don't. And so then now I know, okay, I don't think anything will happen in that show because I've entered, multiple with that judge, or this judge I've done well with. And you start to kind of figure out like where your best efforts are at.
It's not about competing. It's more about, hey, I got into this show with other people that like I enjoy, and how cool would it be to get juried into a show and my artwork is hanging next to such and such artist?
I think that's absolutely true. And it's a great community. The watercolor artist community is fantastic. There's not been an artist that I've run into that wasn't always willing to help you out and tell you, techniques and tips or, advice. When I first started, like I said, I didn't know anything really. And so I looked up art, watercolor artists, and I reached out to Carol Carter, and she is now a lifetime friend of mine. And she she kind of helped me out. And when I would get like, all of a sudden, like a French magazine would come and say, we want to do an article. I'm like, I don't know this magazine from Adam. So I would, write to people I knew and say, hey, is this legit? And other people have done this. So they're like, yeah, I was in that, so many years ago or whatever. But you really do start to get this community, and you start to know everyone. And so I encourage people, to try to go to the receptions if you can get out there. I'm going to go to Fabriano this year. I bought tickets, so I'm excited because there's a lot of artists that I haven't met in person that I'm very excited to do that. And that's one thing I always was like, okay, if I'm in an area, who's in this area? And I will go out and meet that person and, meet those artists and see if I can form my own community. That's been really good too, is to kind of hook in immediately with some like-minded folks, or make your own. You've got all this online stuff. I have a group that's online that we exhibit all over the world, and we meet online. We've done most of our trips together have been overseas, not even within the United States. So so find a community for yourself. There's people out there that will either hold you accountable or help you out, or it's really nice to have a group where you're like, okay, what shows are on your radar? Keep us like, okay, the deadline for this is coming up, or this is happening, or this opportunity. So it helps you kind of keep the creative energy going, because it's really isolating to be an artist. We're in our studios a lot or by ourselves a lot, so you really need to have some people helping you along and pushing you along. So find some people.
I would hope that we're surrounded ourselves with people that are wanting to encourage others that can't and don't have a desire to buy art, but they can appreciate art.
Right. It's awesome. And it's awesome to hang out with other artists. So I think it's cool. And the cool thing about our job or our hobby, we never have to retire from it. I think that's the coolest thing. We found our niche, right?
For sure.